that a shave and a haircut. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary St. Clair. Good afternoon. I would like to call this meeting of Community Emergency Services to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly or visually recording this meeting. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is one change to the agenda. Item 10.1, notice of motion respecting Skate the Dream, McMaster's Women's Hockey.
So we have the motion before us. What is the will? Yep. May I please have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Partridge, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All those in favor? Carried. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing as that there are none, we'll move on to approvals of the previous minute. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes of July 6, 2016 Emergency and Community Services meeting as presented? Moved by Marula, seconded by Skelly. All those in favor? To our good friend, Councillor Collins, feel free to come on down, or you're good where you are. Yeah. No comment. Order, please. We'll have none of that in here. Delegation requests. There are two delegation requests. If I could have council's or committee's indulgence though for a minute before we go there, I would like to formally recognize and acknowledge Chief David Cunliffe, our new Chief of Police here. Fire, sorry. I would say that was wishful thinking. That'd be inappropriate, so I won't say that. Welcome and thank you so much for being here. And if I could, on a very serious note, just acknowledge the tremendous amount of work and sacrifice and risk that your crew do on a regular basis, but more specifically in regards to the tragedy that happened in our community in the Keith neighborhood on Niagara Street. I just wanted to publicly say that you, as well as the full EMS staff from the beginning of the call right to the end of the work, it needs to be acknowledged. And I had mentioned this to you personally, that I don't think the general public really fully comprehends the impact that it has doing that type of work in those type of conditions. So we're certainly grateful, not just in Ward 3, but I think it's safe to say from across the city, for the work that you do, and wholeheartedly welcome you as our Chief of Fire. As our Chief of Fire, thank you. We certainly look forward to working with you. So with that, we will go on to the two delegation requests. Item 4.1, which is William Ury, Hamilton Olympic Club, respecting the 90th anniversary to the Hamilton Olympic Club for the September 12, 26 meeting. Councillor Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd be happy to move that for the September meeting. Through you to Jack, though, the Hamilton Olympic Club primarily practices out of the track and field at Mohawk Sports Park. I believe Mohawk Sports Park was part of the Canada Federal 150 program, the top 24 that we put in, about $600,000. Could you and other staff just bring back at that time when Bill presents, maybe just some confirmed data as to where any facility improvements moving towards their 90th anniversary celebration that he's going to share the good news with us for next year? Jack, that you and maybe between you and Rome come back with that information. Mr. Chairman, through you, please. I just thought it'd be timely.
Through the chair, by all means, Councillor.
Terrific. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll move for him to come in September. Thank you.
Okay, that's moved by Jackson, seconded by Partridge. All those in favor? Carried. Excellent. Item 4.2, our good friend, Mr. Calvin Kane, from OHSNA Hamilton, respecting a formal recognition and transformational process for the former Dom Hostel program. Moved by Marula, seconded by Skelly. All those in favor? Carried. So that's an item 4.2. We're now on to consent items. 5.1, which is the Senior Advisories Committee. We have, may I please have a motion to receive the Seniors Advisory Committee meeting? Yes, both of them. That's for February 5th and March 4th, 2015. Councillor Tom Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, just to be consistent, and Lisa will know this as a fairly new member of Clerks and Standing Committee, I've always consistently asked the subcommittee minutes be brought as soon as possible to the Standing Committee because issues might be timely for appropriate debate and discussion, may require funding ultimately from Council. And it was explained to me in light of one departure in the Clerk's Department, Lisa coming and taking over. A couple of things may have just kind of drifted between the chairs, but hopefully in the future they'll be back in a more timely fashion. With that, I'll support adopting them. Thank you.
Excellent. And I have full confidence in Lisa to be able to do that. We have moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Marula. All those in favor? Carried. Now, item 5.2 is an information report respecting the disposal of obsolete gear. If we could just have a comment on that, an overview quickly. Item 5.2. Well, the statement was that there may have been a side conversation, but we will not be entertaining that today. I will use the gavel.
Yes, okay, thank.
Chief Cunliffe, Fire Department. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair to the committee, the fire department had some self-protective gear, firefighting gear, helmets, and bunker gear that had got to its end of life as per the standards. That gear is not, it's not something that we can then utilize any longer for active firefighting. We are looking for a means by which that we could do something with it that could help others. Firefighters Without Borders is a worldwide organization that takes that type of gear from the fire service and then donates it to third world countries that don't have the ability to purchase a gear. And in many cases, folks that are providing fire protection services are doing it without any kind of gear at all. We're fortunate they have a mission that's going to be taking place very shortly. So the gear that we were able to provide to them will be going to St. Lucia and Honduras to be able to be used to help to increase the level of protection for the folks that are trying to help those in those countries.
Outstanding. Thank you for the update. We have a speakers list of Councillor Skelly.
Thank you. And I think this is a remarkable opportunity. Years and years ago when I was working in Kingston, Ontario, the city partnered with Kingston, Jamaica. And through Hotel Dieu Hospital at the time, we sent a lot of eyeglasses and equipment, wheelchairs, et cetera. And you don't recognize or realize the need for it until you actually have an opportunity to travel and see who gets to use this considered discarded equipment. But I'm just curious, with the organization that is providing the opportunity, do they also provide training to the firefighters?
So through the chair to the councillor, yes, Firefighter Without Borders actually, they're usually made up of North American firefighters that donate their time to go. So there is a training component that they also do that they'll go over and provide technique. When they bring equipment, that's one of the things is when they take the equipment, they'll give the opportunity to provide training on it. They'll also provide generic training as well. So it is a very worthwhile organization.
Thank you. I think it's wonderful.
Excellent. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also, too, think this is just great. You know, it worked out so well through you to the chief. It worked out so well with the ambulance that went to St. John's when we voted on that. I believe it was last year or the year before that we made those arrangements. So I'm quite happy to second receipt of this report if Councillor Skelly wants to move it, or vice versa. Thank you. Thanks for your good work, Dave.
And if I could pass, just a question, if I could pass the chair over to Councillor Skelly through you to Chief Cunliffe, Fire Department. If you could just give us an overview of some of the types of equipment that would be going over there. What stuff is at the end of use?
So through the chair to the councillor, there were helmets that were at their 10-year, beyond the 10-year mark, which is their end of life, as well as there were some bunker gear, which is pants and coats, which were beyond their 10-year life as well. And there were a couple of first aid bags that we had used that were also at their end of life. So that's pretty much what was included in that.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Those are my questions, Councillor Scarlett. I'll take the chair back. Moved by yourself, seconded by Councillor Partridge, that the motion be received. Thank you for that update, a great news story, and certainly in line with some of the other conversations that we've been having around the table. All those in favor? Carried. So we now are on to public hearings and delegations. We'll now hear a delegation from Calvin Kane, OHSNA, Ontario Homes for Special Needs Association, Hamilton, respecting the formal recognition and transformation process of the former domiciliary hostel program to provincial housing with support program in the funding category. Calvin, please come forward. And I should say, I want to say this again on the record publicly. Thank you for that little housekeeping item that you and I have been talking about. We certainly welcome you back and look forward to your input.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Calvin Kane. I am the president of the Ontario Home for Special Needs Association. I've been here before through the chair and through councillors. I have a helper this time around.
Hi, I'm Sonia Brown. I'm an operator on the mountain. Councillor Whitehead is actually my councillor.
And he is here just in time to hear your
Okay, I'm the president of the association, the Ontario Home for Special Needs Association. I'm also an operator. Okay, so the topics and the thing that we're going to discuss today is a high-level update and overview of the supportive housing program, formerly Dom Hostel program. I'll touch a little bit on prior program reviews. I'll touch a little bit on the situation as it is today. I'll touch a little bit on our requests for a way forward. The City of Hamilton sponsored a review, SHS report, in 2011. And through that review, they went through the entire, well, I should say they went through most of the homes, and they came up with 29 recommendations of how to forward or get this program moving forward. One of the more prominent issues that they found was that the program was underfunded. Of those 29 recommendations, we had a review committee set up to implement these recommendations. I think it's around 75% of those recommendations were implemented, and that's a hats off to Hamilton to doing things that we set out to do. However, the program is still underfunded. There also was a Grant Thornton report written and sponsored by the Ontario Home for Special Needs Association, and this not just cover Hamilton, this is broader, it's covered entire Ontario. And where they looked at larger homes, smaller homes, different communities, and basically came up with 5 recommendations, one of which is the same thing. The program is underfunded, not just in Hamilton, but throughout Ontario. The consultant also did a follow-up review. That study was done in 2007, but they did a review again, updated in 2014, which again basically said the same thing. It was a follow-up. In fact, the costs and the burdens on the homes are even greater. We in Hamilton also have pressures, and we have a working group that we work with the city, the operators, the association executive work with the city. I consider this working group a continuous improvement group. The working group is unique to Hamilton. I've traveled through Ontario to the different regions and through the association and meet directors and presidents from all over Ontario, and they don't have anything like what we have in Hamilton. So again, kudos to Hamilton for having such a unique relationship with the city. We have regular meetings, and it's basically a platform to communicate, discuss, and derive resolution for program issues. It's chaired by Councillor Whitehead, along with Community Service Department staff, managers, the OSHNA executives, sometimes we bring on some operators as well, public health, by-law enforcement, management and representative, and also the public health nurse. These are folks that comes into the home on schedule frequency to inspect to make sure that we abide by the different standards that's set out. So that's where, those are the reviews, and that's where we were. Now we're going to move to the now, where we are today. The Dom Hostel program provincially is no longer recognized by the province. We don't exist. However, they have brought in a housing with related support category, and in 2014 and in 2012, basically saying we have to meet certain guidelines. As a former Dom Hostel program, we have to meet these guidelines. I'll get to the guidelines in a sec, but I'm just describing where we are today. The former Dom Hostel program has a per diem of about $50 a day. That's what the city pays for supplying housing and care for these folks that are looking for conditions that may affect them that they cannot provide for themselves. So the city pays for occupied beds. So that means that if you have somebody that's in a particular bed, and I don't like using the term bed, but that's the industry, that's what they call it, that if it's empty, the city doesn't pay. But if it's full, the city pays. In 2016, January, there was a waiting list imposed on the program, not enough funds. And the waiting list did not have an expiry date. It was open because people come into the program, people leave. Current homes right now, as of July of 2016, we've basically closed 4 homes. These 4 homes were subsidized at one point, I would say like 2 years ago. They lost their funding for whatever reason. I'm not here to discuss that. But they lost their subsidy. And what happened, the city now has to then look at the conditions that these folks are living in, and the providers trying to provide care and service for $22.50 a day. It's next to impossible. So the homes were closed, and the now operators who are being subsidized took those people in at this lower rate, which really put them at a disadvantage and put them at a risk of also closing. This also increased the available vacancy because nobody's coming in, and if somebody is leaving and there's no subsidy, then your bed becomes vacant. The implication of this wait list right now, it's been a pet peeve for me as well, but I have to really try to rationalize the impact. The shelters are full. Shelters are temporary housing. They are funded under a different scheme. It's almost like a block funding where they get subsidy or subsidized whether they're full or not. So if they're, whether they're full or not, that's basically what it is. So they still get the money. And I did my calculation, it equates to around $58 a day. The other part of the implications that I see is the longer stays in the hospital. It's an expensive place to keep people. At $1,000 a day. I got a call from a caseworker in the hospital, and they have 6 people there with dual diagnosis needed at home, and they are on the wait list. It's $1,000 a day. You do the math. It doesn't add up. It also delays the discharge process, where you and I may have a family member who wants to get in the hospital who cannot get in the hospital because there's no beds, because somebody's in there that's not supposed to be there, or want to be discharged but cannot find a place to go. Supportive housing program is one of the easiest places to get in and get the care that you need. The other part of it is the streets of Hamilton. It's an option for those who fall through the cracks. It increased the emergency room volumes, meaning people are there sometimes just because they missed their meds. They didn't take their meds, they can't get their meds, and they're off their meds. Okay. This data is not captured on a waitlist report. Okay, the city gives us a report every month telling us how many people are on the waiting list. I just got one today. It's about 89 or 86 people on the wait list right now, waiting to get on homes. You got about 56 folks who are in homes that are not subsidized, meaning that the operator now has to pick up that range from $22.50 a day to keep them in the home and provide the care and the service that they need. So there's no differentiation between somebody who's subsidized or somebody who's not. The operator still has to provide the care for them because they have to comply. Today, there is really a systematic or a negative trend in the beds that are available. In 2010, we had 1,080 beds with paid subsidy. In 2016, we're down to 740 that the city is actually paying for. But in actuality, we have about 910 that's available. That's a difference between about 230 that's sitting there that are just there. If you want to call them inventory, whatever we need to call, but they're there. And they're not being utilized. But yet we have a wait list. Funding not adequate for sustain expected levels of service. Really, that's what it is, boils down to. We are a single source funding service. We get our funding through the CHIPI program. The wait list is putting vulnerable people at staying homeless. Not homeless, they're staying homeless because they're on this wait list. Today, our request is for recognition of the program, supportive housing, as part of the housing and support category in the CHIPI guidelines that was rolled out in 2012. We are in compliance of the 40 guidelines that were rolled out. I think you have a copy of that with all the guidelines. These are the things that we as operator have to adhere to and be ready to show once the inspectors show up and to have a decent home.
Kelvin, just using the rationale of your subtitles and just reminding you there's a 5-minute kind of delegation.
Yes, I'm just about there.
Okay, I just didn't know if you had a slide for every subtitle.
Yeah, I give you the copy so you can read it at your
appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. As part of the housing with support category CHIPI guidelines in 2012, we are in compliance with all 40 guidelines. We are also in compliance with the 8 new CHIPI guidelines that were slated and rolled out with housing with related support in 2014. We are asking for the city to recognize and formally make the name change to align with the current ministry documentation. We are asking and request that the city terminate this wait list. Again, I say, we are asking and request that the city terminate this wait list and apply adequate funding. We are also looking for and asking for an urgent and strategic plan to address the CHIPI funding allocation for housing with support, which will be increased in 2000. The allotment will be increased in 2017. Apply annual inflation adjustment to sustain and maintain the standards. That's very, very important because we fall behind, and I'll be coming back to have more meetings to say that we're falling behind. Also, to secure sustainable funding to stop this erosion, closures of one of Hamilton's core affordable housing program. We are a permanent housing solution for the city of Hamilton. Our residents are vulnerable and challenged, and thus they need adequate funding to support and maintain a good quality of life.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Whitehead, the floor is yours.
So I actually just visited 50. One of the things clearly was identified was the fact that it's a very well-run home. I was very impressed. It's a sort of module type setting with the different housing, with the backyards all adjoined. And then I talked to some of the residents who feel like, in fact, that some of them just came back from Victoria Park, I think, swimming, and a number of them went, I believe, canoeing. So it's a real family atmosphere. Now, those could choose to live in this, obviously at higher cost if they have the dollars, but they chose it. Some of them have been there for like 10, 15 years. So I was really impressed with the tour I had yesterday of that particular home. I've had a number of very impressive tours. I know Joanne has attended a couple with me as well. And one of the points that were being made is that we need to ensure that we provide a number of choices. This is a choice for certain clientele that feel more comfortable in a home type, non-institutional settings. Would that be a correct, accurate reflection?
That would be correct, to you, Chair.
How long has the RCF's domicile hostels been around in the city of Hamilton?
Family, we've been around for over 40 years. We're like one of the originals, so I think there was only other 3 or 4 families.
One I was at yesterday was up and running for 40 years. How many clients currently are being served? Do you have those numbers by RCFs?
740.
740?
735, 740.
You indicated that at one point the number of clients being served through this with the support of the subsidy, what was that number?
It's 1,080 in 2010.
1,080?
Yeah. So some of those, the reason why the number has changed as well as some of those, the homes have closed.
Okay. The other question I have is the province, and there's been talk about a new, not an arrangement, but a new approach to housing. Do you know what is being proposed or what type of discussions are taking place around that framework?
Through the chair to the councillor, I am privy right now to some information regarding the HSC, which is the Home for Special Care Association program. Sorry, they are going through a modernization of their program, and they're going to do it within a year. So the Minister of Health is moving forward on that aspect in trying to determine the actual things that are happening in the home and what does it take at this current date and time. So they're really looking at a review, if you want to call it that, to try and focus on what's best for the client, what's the best needs for the client, and how to fund it.
Appreciate that. Can you describe, so that not just my colleagues who I'm sure are aware, but anyone on live stream, the clients that you take, can you describe some of the challenges of these clients and the services you need to provide?
We have clients, I've talked to several operators, part of the association and part who are not a part of the association. It doesn't matter, they call me anyway, where they have a client who will come and speak to you like any ordinary person. There's not a problem with them, but that same client cannot cross the street. They will not look left, they will not look right, they'll go right across the street. Going to the hospital with that client, the operator has to take darts, take him to the hospital or take him to the doctor's office. They then in turn take the time off to be there to talk to the doctor with the person. Hence, the person goes in and they come out. The doctor gives them a prescription and they leave. There's no discussion of what's going on in the home, what's going on with that person, what changes have been they have observed in the time that the person has been in the home. So that the operator is a key person in terms of the care to make sure that this information is brought forward to the client, to the doctors as well. I have a person who came from their house. They had their home, and there was no running toilet in the home. This is in Hamilton. So I had to spend time to teach them how to bathe themselves, how to do all those things. We got CCAC in to help us to do all of the things that you and I take for granted, to the point where that person, they were brain damaged, but they were able to function on their own after a period of time.
So it's safe to say that there's a high percentage of clients that have high needs that are currently living in these homes.
That's correct. I will temper that as well, that in the couple of years that I've seen, I'm also seeing the opposite scale, end of the scale, where we're seeing 22-year-old, 21-year-old, 25-year-olds who are coming in with dual diagnosis. And there are they're very a handful to handle those kind of folks because they're coming in with an attitude. You have to monitor their meds, making sure that they're on their meds, and if the subtle change, you got to get back to the doctor to see what else they can do because they will get very aggressive or anxious or want to do things that is unacceptable.
And you work very closely with the social workers and
very
so
much.
And you provide life skills for these individuals in the homes as well.
That's correct. That's correct. Appointments, way to do things. Talk to them about their laundry. Talk about their incontinence supply, what they need to do, how to basically hygiene.
What percentage of these clients could live independently?
I will answer that question in saying that in my experience, I see the social worker deems that this person cannot live or can move forward. And what I've seen is that they've moved forward, but they've come right back.
So is it safe to say there's a high percentage of people living in these homes that could not live independently?
That is correct.
Thank you.
But the larger percentage cannot.
Correct.
And you still give them the opportunity, if that is their desire, to live on their own, because I've had that where tried them to live on their own, but then they come back again. But you want to still give them that up. That's
Absolutely.
choice, right? That's us wanting to try something. So I myself, and I know some of the other operators, they do give them that.
I asked that question because I'm going somewhere with this, but I met an autistic youth in his mid-20s, did try to live independently, was in a home, went to work, live independently, and came back to the home and was really happy that he was back in the home. I talked to a social worker about the challenges of this particular individual, and she had talked about how he improved from being happy and so forth in the environment that he found himself in at the RCF. So clearly the social workers are tied very tightly with the RCFs and the workers at the RCF.
Definitely.
The reason I'm asking that question, because I've made this point before, but I don't know if I'm correct, but I need to understand this. When we're talking about housing, we're talking about vulnerability on a scale of 1 to 5. The type of clients we find in our RCF, where would they rank in regards to the level of vulnerability? 4 or 5. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whitehead. We have Councillor Skelly.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Through the chair, can you explain to me the reason for the discrepancy in the standard of care at individual or different facilities? It clearly seem, in my opinion anyway, seem to be very reputable, good facilities, and some that are pretty...
Yes. I to the chair, I can't say I can give you a definitive answer on that because that's just like any business out there. You got some that are very much productive and proactive and some that are not as well. So the ones that are part of the association, myself personally, I've visited a few, and I've visited them on occasion where there's actually an inspection going on. And I have not sided with some of their questions and have them make the changes as required by the inspection. I've also, at the same time, talked to the inspector and says, well, really, that's really not a change that required. You can do with an alternative change. So, yes, they do have that 1% or that 2%, whatever you want to call it, the homes that are not as proactive as others. They do exist. What we're trying to do in an association is trying to, I wouldn't say self-govern, but we're trying to get them to know that for us to move forward, they have to step up to the plate and contribute.
Through the chair, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it about a profit margin in the end of the day? Because there can be a huge discrepancy in that standard of care.
The smaller homes, you'll find that they have a lot more struggles. Okay, it's an economy of scale. You've got so much in the pie, and then you have to try and make it work for you. Okay, so the smaller homes are under siege, and that's why we're saying that if the funding is somewhat appropriate, then the smaller homes will be able to put more funding or more money into not just the staffing. You're looking at staffing at minimum wage. You got to really search to try and find somebody really good to work for you for that kind of money. And the infrastructure, you got to be going out getting loans to do the infrastructure, because tomorrow you take somebody out of the hospital, they put a hole in the wall, you have to fix it. Okay, the food, as we are now governed by the Canada Food Guide, yes, we have to go out and shop for food, and some may do it more readily than others, but the majority of the homes are very good homes.
The Chair, economies of scale, you mentioned economies of scale, of course. Years ago, we shifted from what were deemed institutions.
Correct.
And into smaller, I guess, more of a home care facility. Has that worked in your opinion? Or is there an opportunity, do you think, that perhaps we should be looking at facilities that would house more people, or is that too dangerous in terms of the different personalities? I'm just thinking of money, with money being so, such an issue in terms of the lack of funding.
To the chair, sorry. The smaller homes are essential. They are very, very much essential. You have somebody with high anxiety, they will not survive in those homes. So the smaller homes are very essential. It's just the fact that it's very hard for you to have a 10-bed home and have somebody 25-bed home and have the same staffing for both. Okay, so that's where it really gets really tough for the small homes. But it provides a person who really have an anxiety issue or just don't want to be around a whole bunch of people to have a home of 10 people, where at times there may be only 3 or 4 people watching TV and not 20 people watching TV. Then you have a fuss on what program we need to watch. So the smaller homes are needed. I think it was a good idea for Hamilton to move in the direction of the smaller homes so that it can be, as the word says, homely. It can be something that you live in a neighborhood and you would never know, other than you've seen somebody smoking in the front lawn, that you know that that's actually a home for vulnerable people. So they feel belong.
Through the Chair, can you just expand briefly on the funding model? Does the money follow the person, or is it allocated to the bed?
It is allocated to the bed. So if the person comes in, it's a subsidized beds. The person that is then given the subsidy based upon their needs once they're qualified.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sally. Seeing as there's no other speakers, may I please have a motion to receive? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much for joining us.
Let's just say one thing through the chair. I know that there's a motion coming through regarding the same topic, and I would say that I do support that motion that's going through. It will be coming up. I fully support a review. I fully support an investigation. I fully support us moving forward on that. So as an association, I'm saying that on record that we support that motion.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those comments. Feel free to stay and wait and see how that goes. We are now on to what appears to be item 8.1. Councillor Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, through you to some very fine people from staff who oversaw the in-house Snow Angels program, which I must say is probably its best success in the 7 or 8 years of its existence. Irene Heffernan back there, Al Fletcher, and who else am I missing? Suzanne Brown, if she's in or not here today on vacation. So, Mr. Chairman, maybe just through you to Al or Irene, who wants to just maybe do a cursory summary for the benefit of my colleagues who may not be as familiar with the success of the program. As Irene's preparing, I think you matched about 260 of the most vulnerable seniors and those with disabilities in our community, clearing their snow. allowing them to stay in their homes through the winter season without hardship. And I think there's 200 left, but maybe you can give a quick update, Al, both on the successes and the challenges moving forward. Through you, Mr. Chairman, please.
Councillor Jackson, would you allow me for 1 second to make a quick comment? Because
Please.
I already know in my heart they probably will not mention this in their report. But I know for a fact that our staff, our frontline staff, Mr. Fletcher included, oftentimes if there were ever any gaps in service, would actually go out above and beyond and help assist this program. Something that I think needs to be acknowledged. All the members, all the frontline people who made this happen, and certainly who have gone like way above and beyond and out of their way to see this program be supported, I think needs to be acknowledged. And I thank you on behalf of this committee for that, because I know you're probably not going to report that. So you go ahead, Al. Now you can do your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no comment. So the program, if you recall, last October, Council brought it in-house from Volunteer Hamilton. And that's when, beginning in November, Irene, and we were lucky enough to have Barb Klimstra join us as well, who was originally part of Volunteer Hamilton, and set off on a very aggressive recruitment of volunteers and did the very best that we could in the short term, not knowing when the first snowfall would hit. So it ended up being very successful. We were able to match, we committed to council to match those residents who were matched the previous year through Volunteer Hamilton, which was about 156 of those people. Their driveways, their sidewalks were all shoveled. Based on the volunteer recruitment we did in the areas, we were able to add on additional residents to a total of 260 residents were shoveled through the winter. 13 snowfalls this year. We did get off a little bit lucky with the snow this year. We do appreciate that. Thank you, Mother Nature. We had 193 volunteers that all took part in this, including recruitment of our own city staff through DMTs and EMT as well. So we're pleased with what happened. Irene has now recovered from the work that we did through last year and through the last snowfall in April. That came that Councillor Jackson wanted to check to make sure we hadn't shut down the program, which we had not. So this year we're proposing to maintain that. Our intent is to service 260 again. The things that we did not do last year were do the eligibility review, because we used a Volunteer Hamilton client list that they had. There were still some people on that list that we did not get matched. With the resources we have and using the $100,000 that Council had allocated to Volunteer Hamilton, we'd like to continue that program for this next year and report back to you then when we've had a chance to do a full recruitment process starting in September, and then we can report back to you on how we managed and on going forward on how we would suggest you, if you so choose to expand the program, how we would suggest that would be done with resources and funding necessary to make it possible.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Al. Nice summary there of both the success and plan of action moving forward. Of course, nobody in the middle of this heat wave would even think about it, but this is all good planning months in advance. And if my mathematics works out correctly, Al, 260 match for the 100,000 for a winter season, that's about $400 per client over the winter season. And I think that's darn good expenditure in a $1.6 billion corporation in helping, again, those seniors that otherwise, without support services at home, like home care, personal support workers, in some cases, nurses, what we're offering them here, might otherwise maybe end up being in an institution, in a long-term care facility, whatever. So for me, it's a great program. It's, I think, one of its kind in Ontario. And this is just an information report here today, but I think it's the foundation for another successful year. And again, between pure volunteers from outside the corporation and volunteers from within, I think it was a nice mix and a nice match for the program. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me the comments.
Are there any other questions on the first-time speaker? If I could pass the chair, Councillor Skelly, to you, through you to Al, and I know we spoke about this preliminarily, and what I'll say now, because I think it's an important piece, is just the impact in terms of the value of the service of the actual volunteer hours. And I know certainly not asking for that information now, but I think it's a consideration that we can all in our head begin to kind of fully appreciate just what that $100,000 investment looks like in terms of people hour, time, cost, and then just the other value-added service to some of our vulnerable populations, many of which seniors, of course, which the previous speaker, Councillor Jackson, has such a champion's heart for. So in mind with the future reports, I'd like to get a sense, and I know there's probably a matrix for that, but with all of our volunteer efforts through the city, I think it's important to put a value on what the value is. So those are my comments. Councillor Skelly, if I could.
You may take the chair back, but Councillor Partridge has a comment.
Excellent. Councillor Partridge, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Al. Great program. Al, I'm just wondering if you could expand a bit on the relationship or the partnership with the Flamborough Community Information Services. I believe that Volunteer Hamilton had a partnership in that Volunteer Flamborough was part of the Flamborough Community Information Services under the umbrella of Volunteer Hamilton. But I'm just wondering if you could expand on the relationship. It says in the report that $1,000 is subsidized annually to Flamborough. What is that used for, and how is the program operated up there, through you, Mr. Chair?
As a chair to the councillor. So that $1,000 was originated from Volunteer Hamilton. We continued that along last year, and the group out of Flamborough has their own set of volunteers, and the money's just used to help support that arrangement that they have there. So they take care of Flamborough. We work on everything else.
Right, thank you, and I appreciate that. But do you have, is there a partnership where you're working together, you're sharing not so much resources because Flamborough has their own volunteers, but in terms of the process of how the program runs?
Through the chair, this was for the Waterdown area, the Flamborough area. That was all operated by them. We provide the funding to help support the cause.
Prior to.
There was no input really seeking help from us on that. They were able to manage it on their own.
They do their own marketing.
So the comment is, I think probably we can learn something from what they've done as well.
Right.
And compare notes.
Thank you.
So.
That's kind of where I was heading with this, so I appreciate that. And just to let you know as well, there is a new executive director who has come on board with the Flamborough Community Information Services. Her name is Amelia, and I believe she's been there about 3 or 4 months now, and just delightful to work with, and very much wanting to partner more with the city. And so I would encourage staff, through you, Mr. Chair, to reach out to Amelia for a conversation or lunch. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Excellent. May I please have a motion to receive that report, item 8.2, moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded 8.1, seconded by Councillor Whitehead. All those in favor? Carried. Excellent. On item 8.2 with a nice blue shirt, Councillor Whitehead.
Staff, but I think I also need to thank Councillor Collins. He has done and it continues to do an incredible job on the housing file. And I know that for a number of years sitting on this committee and asking questions, it was concerning that it appeared that there's a disproportionate amount of funding, which is not a lot of funding to start with in regards to that envelope, that are going to locations, but it wasn't being proportional relative to the responsibility and the burden that the city carries on capital. It appears, and here's the question I'm going to ask staff, through this, any future funding models, am I to understand now that 50% of the infrastructure type dollars will in fact be going to Hamilton Housing?
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, that is correct. This policy will set out the framework by which we would allocate funding to the social housing providers. That would be subject to any terms and conditions that come with that funding.
Understood. So I think it's overdue. I've raised this in the past, and I think that Councillor Collins is, like I said, what he's done in the short time he's been there and trying to find capital and get more units up and running or fixed so that they could be providing a service more readily is absolutely incredible. And the fact that he raised this again to review, and here we are now actually addressing it in a more fair-minded way, I really appreciate that, and I will be moving the motion, the report. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff, Tammy, Adam, Julie, and certainly Joanne for their assistance. And this has certainly been an outstanding issue for a number of us. And I had a very good conversation with Jillian before she retired, and she provided me with a chart. And certainly, we can attribute some of the inequity to the fact that in some cases for new unit builds, city housing didn't apply. So as we've mentioned in the past, we weren't in an expansion mode when we were looking at trying to just renovate and repair our current housing stock. So there's no blame to be cast in any shape or form. But we do know what's on the horizon with both the province and the feds. And so this is a policy change that will certainly help city housing tremendously, knowing what's coming, and certainly doesn't disadvantage anyone else who's in the housing industry and may have the same or share the same challenges that we have, and we all have the same challenges. So I'm just happy that we have a policy in place that seems to be more fair and equitable and gives city housing a better chance to compete and provide a better service to our current tenants and future tenants who may move into new units. So thanks to staff for responding so quickly. I'm certainly satisfied with everything that's in the report, and look forward to supporting it at council. And thanks for the kind words from Councillor McKay.
And I would just like to also echo those kind words. Councillor Collins, you've been phenomenal on this file. Sitting next to you at City Housing Hamilton, as well as being on the portfolio committee, and having the privilege of being the chair of this committee, understanding the complexities. I do think that it would be appropriate, just for the people that are here, as well as those that might be tuning in, to get a sense for what's before us with a kind of a high, brief overview of some of the implications of this work.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the past, we've received funding that has not had specific conditions attached to it, and that is kind of a lost opportunity for us to allocate it in an equitable way. So we've used other manners to do so. Most of the time, we do have funding that is attached to certain conditions, and in which case we would go out through the appropriate course of action. In this case, this really lets us respond to the needs of the providers on a proportional basis, but also direct funding to fit some of those needs and demands that, in particular, City Housing Hamilton has in terms of vacant units, in terms of its capital backlog. So I think that starting with that 50% equitable distribution, or that proportional distribution, I should say.
I appreciate that feedback, Adam. If I could pass the chair over briefly just to follow up with a few questions, just to, again, kind of give a better context for where we're at. There was talk about partnerships, and I know I sat here with the point-in-time homelessness count with Minister McMeekin. We know provincially the long-term housing strategy came out. We also know the feds potentially are interested in this. And so some of the feedback that we've had, the coverage, particularly criticisms in City Housing Hamilton, is that we're not adequately upkeeping our units. Could you just comment on kind of that process with the downloading and how the funding works? Because I often feel, if I could, Madam Chair, we're unfairly criticized for not having enough money from the province to do our capital upgrades, and how this motion might be able to help us with some of that backlog.
Okay, so through the chair, we do know we have, City Housing Hamilton in particular has approximately $100,000 in capital backlogs based on its most current building condition assessments. So funding that's coming down to the province. Per unit? That overall for the whole.
It's more than 100,000.
I'm sorry, 100 million.
Yeah, 100 million. Just for people that are present, $100 million in backlog, which is. Sorry, continue.
So that's specific to City Housing Hamilton, and not, as it would stand to reason, proportionally speaking, the other social housing providers have approximately the same amount of capital backlog as well.
So just to be clear, and for people that are watching and or are very interested in the housing file, I know I've had a lot of people provide feedback through you, Madam Chair, to Adam. The province provides us with operating costs, but often not enough money for the big capital costs, which is why we're in a $100 million deficit. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is fair to say. The download happened in 2001, and we get certain funding that we flow through. We fund a lot of the social housing providers on the tax levy, but capital funding, that extra level of capital funding, has not been part of that.
So then to round it out, I use the analogy that it'd be like getting a beautiful mansion given to you by your grandparents, but then not having enough money to pay the taxes or fix the roof or do anything, barely just to get by, because the assets there doesn't mean you necessarily have the money. A very important distinction, Madam Chair and members of council, and what this does, anticipating potential federal funding from Minister Sohi or DeClose or any of the others that are working on potential housing file, will position under Councillor Collins' leadership, City Housing to get at that $100 million backlog and hopefully offset the 5,700 person waiting list that we have. So great work done around the table, and thanks again to staff. Madam Chair, I'm happy to take the chair back, and I do see Councillor Whitehead.
I have just one question, and I think again, this is part of Councillor Collins' leadership. Was there not a discussion, and I don't know if there's legislative or regulatory issues that need to be resolved, that would actually provide yet another tool in borrowing money based on the asset, so like a mortgage type setup? Has there been any discussion on what needs to be changed to be able to accommodate that ability to generate some capital?
Yes, so through the long-term affordable housing strategy, there are changes coming to the Housing Services Act. I anticipate that will include some greater flexibility in terms of leveraging assets.
Great, thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. So that's moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Carried. Excellent. Thank you very much. We are now on to 8.3, which is the Municipal Facilities By-law. Are there any questions or discussions? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All those in favor? Carried. Information report regarding the child care system special needs resourcing. If we could just have a quick overview of that and then open it up for discussion. Doesn't have to be quick, but succinct is good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Back in 2014, our division undertook a review of how we were currently providing services to special needs children and how the resourcing was being produced out in the community. We made the determination at that time that it was going through one lead agency with 3 different agencies all delivering the same service. We undertook a full RFP process, and at the present time we awarded the contract to Community Living Hamilton. We know that there have implications for the other agencies that currently provide that services, so we're looking at beginning this in January 2017. And through the next few months, we will be working very closely with the community partners to ensure that there's a continuity of services for children and families, and that there's absolutely no disruption to them, as well as supporting agencies along with staff to ensure that there's all opportunities are made available to any current staff within the system, that they will have the opportunities with the agency that's been awarded the contract to ensure that, again, because of the services to children and families, the relationship they have with those teachers is the utmost of importance, and we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support that.
Just for my own housekeeping assurance, does this include any services to children with autism?
Yes, that would, for those children that would be receiving it through child care settings.
So even though this is an information report, I'm going to pass the chair to Councillor Skelly. I'm going to declare an interest. Just mark my spouse.
I often talk to parents that have challenges even in our own rec centers. The reality is that there are certain challenges with people, for example, with autism or special needs, and there isn't always the level of service in our rec centers to facilitate those type of needs. I appreciate, and there's a great organization. They're all, the ones that have been doing it, let's be fair, they've been doing a good job. So I don't want to be critical of them, but there's no question the one that's getting awarded does an incredible job, and I've come across them on many occasions. So I guess the question I have is, will they be providing direct services, or will they be providing funding to other organizations to provide the services?
Mr. Chair, they will be providing the direct service. They will be employing the staff, the resource teachers, and the support facilitators that will be doing the service out in the community. And just to follow up on your one point about the limitation of services for families, we know that we have been able to provide service to a certain level. There's always a wait list. One of the limitations that we also have is that there's a lack of flexibility in the hours and in the settings. We have not been able to provide services for children once they enter school. We know that there's limitations on the before and after care as well when parents are not able to access those because they don't have the level of supports. That's what we're hoping, that as we move through this new process, that we'll be able to begin to address those shortfall areas. Rec centers are another area that we know that also has some deficits, and that we're hoping that with, especially on the older age children in the 9 to 12 category, that we're going to look at some of those opportunities as well.
I appreciate that. A lot of the families get a portion. There are grants or programs. I know even in my case, I can't remember what it amounts to, but it's some dollars to supplement those type of programming in your community. The question is, how do we plug in? Because I guess what I'm saying, there's an envelope of dollars there in families' hands. They're having trouble identifying, or because of the waiting list, spending it. So how do we reconcile that there's money available in parents' hands to some degree from the government to be able to plug their kids into programs, but on the other side there's waiting lists so they can't get in, and yet we got rec centers that don't have sufficient funding to provide this service. I'm just trying to reconcile that. I think there's a piece missing in this equation, that there's a void that could be filled.
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. This funding is directed at child care centers and the licensed setting. However, we do know that many of the partners we work with, such as Hamilton Health Sciences, that is particularly where a lot of those extra supports that children are required. They have a lot of partnerships as well. They're also part of this planning group that we're looking at, seeing how we can ensure that there's a continuum of care for families and trying to leverage all of those different funding envelopes so that families aren't found in that situation where they don't know where to turn.
Yeah, and a good example, just so that people understand what I'm talking about, is with that envelope, I was able to send my son to a camp, but the camp had to have the special services in place. A lot of times that camp would have a waiting list, and my son couldn't get in. I had the dollars, but didn't have the access. So I just wanted to highlight the dollars are being provided. The challenge for parents is finding the programs that don't have extensive waiting lists, so they can get their kids into healthy type, helpful programs. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of parents with autistic kids for sure, and I'm sure other special needs. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good report. Thank you. So my question is, through you, Madam Chair, I have a couple of questions. Is this public knowledge now, or is you're presenting it to us first? Once we approve it at council, then you contact the other agencies? How does that process work?
The agencies have been through you, Chair. The agencies have been contacted. They are aware of the decision, and that we've already met with both of the agencies that were not successful, and we're going to be continuing to meet with them as well.
Okay, thank you. And so I heard, I believe, the clarification that the funding will be to community living, and community living will be providing the services. So they're not funding the other organizations, they're providing the services. When I look at the organizations that did provide and are now no longer part of it, they're in different locations throughout the city. And I'm just wondering, how will the service be provided to the children up on the mountain, to the children throughout other areas of the city? Could you just give me a snapshot of what that looks like through you, Madam Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair. The services are provided at all of the child care programs throughout the community. So it's the staff are attached to child care centers, both resource teachers and support facilitators.
Okay, so it is different daycare providers throughout the city. Some of them are attached to schools, some of them are attached to the Ys, that type of thing. Is that accurate?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct. So
Okay.
there are approximately 80 locations throughout the community.
Okay, and my last question, are you confident, and I understand through the report that there is an internal team I expect being put together to look at the transitioning of this, knowing that we're looking at January 2017, are you confident this will be seamless? Or are you anticipating a couple of challenges, and if so, what would they be?
Through you, Madam Chair, we're anticipating that we are doing our best to ensure that it is seamless. We believe that with the process that we've had in place, the partnerships and the commitment, I think Councillor Whitehead said it very well. These are incredibly skilled agencies that have been providing this service, and it's been mostly about reducing some inefficiencies due to administration costs, and that's one of the reasons why we're moving in this direction. So these are agencies that have the utmost commitment to the children that they serve as well, and that we believe that we'll be able to meet our deadline.
Thank you for that, and I think, as was previously mentioned, it is important to just reiterate that everyone has done such a fabulous job, and their number one priority has been the care of our children in this city, and we certainly appreciate it. Thanks very much for your answers.
Thank you. With no other questions, we need a mover to accept the report. Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor?
We'll resume the chair. We're now on to item 8.5, which is a resolution from the City of Welland regarding the support for development of provincial legislation required registration, licensing, and setting provincial standards for private support living accommodations. Do we have any? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'm a bit ignorant on what they're actually asking. So I would prefer to forward this particular resolution to our staff, have our staff come back at the next emergency services to help clearly understand what the issues are and what they recommend.
Or we could kick it off to your committee.
I would rather staff deal with it.
We'll go to staff, okay.
I'd rather staff deal with it, yeah.
Sounds good.
So I move that we direct this back to staff and report back to this committee.
So we got a referral motion moved by Whitehead, seconded by Skelly. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you for catching that. We have now on to motions. Item 9.1, which is the support of funding for Beasley Youth Asset Development Initiative. Councillor Farr.
Thank you, and it's here before you. That's moved by myself, and I like Councillor Donna Skelly to second it. Thank you very much, Donna. That therefore be it resolved, the City Council support the John Howard Society of Hamilton, Burlington and area in the Beasley Youth Asset Development Initiative by the provision of 10,000 in funding, 5,000 2016, 5,000 2017 from the Neighborhood Action Strategy Fund under Project ID, and the dash and number is there. And thank you to Al Fletcher, formerly of Fleet, who assisted with this and who's done a great job in short order in his time with the Neighborhood Action Strategy. And I just, there's a lot of whereases, it explains everything. Councillor Partridge knows more about youth asset development, having had a very successful, very similar program in Waterdown over the years than any of us. But this is the one committee I sit on outside of being a councillor, associate myself with. It's really important work, and I dedicate this pitch to the late, great Dave Night Train Lane, Mr. Chairman, who I know is a friend of yours. This was one of his many, many passionate endeavors that he created, and a lot of us in the community sit around the table and work with to make life better for the youth by partnering up with every possible organization you could partner up with in the Beasley Neighborhood Association. Thank you, and that's seconded by Councillor Skelly.
Certainly sorely missed, and I think the potential to be a pilot project for the other remaining neighborhood strategies, great youth development. Councillor Partridge, on the motion.
Yeah, just very quickly, I also wanted to reiterate that Mr. Dave Lane was quite involved in the Waterdown program, developing that over the years, and an absolute pleasure to work with. Thank you.
Wonderful. You have the motion before you, moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Carried. We are now on to item 9.2, which is Residential Care Facility Subsidy Program. Councillor Whitehead, please introduce your motion.
Thank you. Well, it's before everyone. I'm not going to go through the whereases. I think they're pretty clear. I believe Joanne and her staff helped develop this motion just so that provide context to my colleagues. Therefore, it be resolved that staff be directed to conduct a review of the current housing and related supports subsidy program to include an assessment of the current residents and the support needs, an inventory of all housing and support programs in the community, a recommendation of what populations the program should serve, a review of the best practices on provision of housing with support for those populations, a program model to best serve those populations, a review of current physical infrastructure, identify the gaps between current system and the proposed model, with a plan to end the wait list by the end of this year and report back to the Emergency and Community Services with a transition plan. So that's the motion.
So yep. Are you seconding that, Councillor? Seconded by Councillor Skelly. I do have one question for the mover of the motion. I heard in there, if I could pass the chair to Councillor Partridge, I think, just because I think you're seconding it. Through you to the mover of the motion, I heard in there reviewing the fiscal fees. So just so for my own clarity, are the residential care facilities now open to opening up their books and having us look at their financial viability? Is that what I heard in the motion?
This is not what the motion is talking about. I think the motion is talking about pretty clearly taking a look at the services we're currently providing, what the housing model is, and looking at the type of population, the physical infrastructure. My understanding is that we set the rules, we set the standards, we set a lot of things, regulations. So those are pretty clearly need to be adhered to. I can tell you that we've closed down a number of RCS because they weren't adhering to those particular standards, and we'll continue closing down the bad ones because there's so many good ones out there. And so I'm not sure what you're getting at.
No, sorry, I misheard you. You said physical infrastructure. I heard fiscal infrastructure. It was an honest mistake. Like, legitimately, I thought you said fiscal, and I thought, wow, they're going to open their books, which would have been also great, but maybe that's for a future conversation. So I'll remove that and support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Whitehead, carry on.
Thank you. And I just want to add, Mr. Chair, that I am talking to the organizations about separating the infrastructure piece from the operating piece and going non-profit so that we can get to those issues, but that's a longer term discussion, which I'd be glad to have. But that's not what this motion deals with today.
I just misheard you. My apologies. So I will take the chair back. You have the motion on the floor, moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Skelly. All those in favor? Carried. We are now on notices of motion, and knowing, is there any motions to waive the rules? Because that typically, sometimes.
Yes, and I did send this to committee yesterday, and I appreciate your indulgence. I wish to move to waive the rules. Seconded by Councillor Whitehead.
All those in favor? Carried. You may now introduce your motion.
This is the Skate the Dream McMaster Women's Hockey motion before you. I think it'd be self-explanatory if I read it out, fairly brief, and then I don't need to speak too much to it. Whereas the McMaster Women's Hockey team has historically provided many hours of volunteer instruction and mentorship during our Skate the Dream program at Eastwood Arena. Whereas the McMaster Women's Hockey Team has indicated a desire to become more involved as volunteers with the Skate the Dream program each of the 4 nights weekly that the program runs. Whereas the McMaster Women's Hockey Team is currently non-varsity but are working with Athletic Director Glenn Grenwald at McMaster to reinstate varsity status and get back to competing with the many great Ontario University varsity clubs. Whereas facilitators of Skate the Dream, the Boys and Girls Club of Hamilton East, calls the McMaster Women's Hockey Team involvement invaluable and, quote, very important in achieving the goals and objectives of teaching our youth how to skate and play hockey and become team players in life, end quote. And whereas the Skate the Dream program has provided for a significant increase in ice time at Eastwood Arena, but the arena remains the most underutilized in the City of Hamilton inventory. And whereas all of us would be very proud to call Eastwood the home of McMaster University Women's Hockey, therefore be it resolved that recreation staff be requested to provide the McMaster Women's Hockey team with 1 hour of practice / game ice time for every 2 hours of volunteering time to be accommodated on weeknights following the Skate the Dream programming, and to a maximum of 4 hours of ice time per week. And that's seconded by Councillor Whitehead.
Oh, wow. Excellent. We have Councillor Skelly.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention through the chair that in light of the fact that women are killing it at the Olympics right now, that I think we have to support women in any Olympic venture, because we clearly need women in order to bring home the medals. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Also worth noting is that women win medals, not women supported by men winning medals, which has been the narrative in the media. Very disgusting, but awesome motion. It is before you. All those in favor? Carried. Outstanding. We now have... No problem, Joanne. Motion has been passed, Jack. But
Through the chair, I was just looking for some clarification from the councillor. Is it for this coming season? Because my only concern is for next year. We're going to need Eastwood because of the closure of Greatmire.
I didn't put that in the wording, and I probably should have mentioned that. This is call it a pilot or a trial, and I do understand the needs in Dundas. I didn't mention it in the motion. I did review and tweaking, but you didn't mention that until now. But regardless, I can assure you, Mr. Director, that if you sharpen skates weeknights, we'll make sure that this is a 1 year and done for now.
Through the chair, and if you're playing, I'll referee.
There you go. Excellent. Look at that. It's already been passed. So I think we're good. We're good. It's on the public record, so you are on the public record. Councillor Whitehead.
Can I ask, through to Jack, currently at Shadok Arena, we have Wi-Fi in the lobby. There's been a number of people, because there's rentals at the multi-use facility, other people use it, and they've been asking why we don't have the Wi-Fi extended into the multi-use facility. It's a very low cost to expand it. Is there any possibility you can take that into consideration and let me know? Because I've had a number of emails now.
Through the chair, I could certainly look into that and expedite that. I don't think it will cost much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor, I'll have you know I received the same emails and invited them down to Gage Park, hopefully, potentially.
Hey, Mr. Chair, and I want to make sure that if it's overflowing at Gage Park,
yes,
that Mohawk College is also has the Tragically Hip on the big screen.
No. Different motion, but I appreciate your support nonetheless. We are now on to item 11.1, which is the amendments of the outstanding business list. May I please have a motion to remove items D, I, and Q from the Emergency and Community Services Committee outstanding list? Moved by Partridge, seconded by Jackson. All those in favor? Carried. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Jackson, seconded by Skelly. All those in favor? Carried. Outstanding work today. Again, Fire Chief Cunliffe, welcome to the team.